Sachi. どうして
Hello everybody, here we are on the scene of a horrible accident where Sachi's parents were hit by a truck driver. It's just horrible. They're lying in the street, bloodied, unable to do anything. And this is what Sachi's mother said to her, because Sachi was just too afraid to move. She was paralyzed with fear. And then she spoke those words. In that instant, I thought I could hear something snap inside me. As my body began to quiver uncontrollably, the world was covered in a black shroud. A split second after the buzzing drone, instead my head finally went silent. I lost consciousness entirely. Apparently, a local passerby quickly reported the incident, and it wasn't long before the ambulances carried us away. Not that I remember any of that. When I opened my eyes for the next time, a full day had passed, and I was lying in a colorless hospital room.
Sachi, 目が覚めたのか?
I heard a chair scraping against the linoleum floor nearby. A moment later, a familiar face appeared before me.
Akihiro Oji-san.
ああ、おじさんだ。それより、体は大丈夫か? どこかが痛かったり、気持ち悪かったりしないか?
I gingerly moved my arms and legs several times, but couldn't find anything wrong with my body.
大丈夫。
そうか。よかった。
My uncle smiled broadly at my words, tears in the corner of his eyes. Still a little dopey from waking up, I felt a simple curiosity about the intense emotion so evident in his face.
ねえ、おじさん。何かあったの?
When I put the question to words, my uncle averted his eyes, his expression filled with reluctance and pain.
お前の両親はな、サチ。事故にあったんだ。
事故。
As I dully repeated my uncle's words, a memory that had slipped cleanly from my mind slowly re-emerged. A small park died in the light of the evening sun. The smell of burning rubber, the sound of a truck idling. And finally, Mom and Dad lying in pools of their own blood. The scene flashed before my eyes in perfect clarity. Reflexively, I tried to look away, but there was no escape. And in the next moment, my ears were filled with that awful, droning buzz.
Sachi.
My field of vision grew slowly narrower, and a choking sense of paralysis spread throughout my body. Felt as though my body temperature had suddenly plunged. A violent wave of nausea and a splitting headache attacked me all at once.
おい、サチ、大丈夫か?
おじさん。
サチ! 先生、サチが目を覚ましたんですが、急に苦しみ出して。
As the world grew dim before my eyes, I could vaguely make out my uncle shouting desperately for someone's attention. Wait, now I can't see or hear anything. Oh, guess I'm fainting again. The instant the thought ran through my head, I plunged into nothingness. It would be a full 3 days before I woke up again. When the nurse noticed my eyes were open, she immediately called the doctor in charge, who conducted a quick examination on the spot. After determining that I wasn't so severely impaired as to cause difficulties in ordinary conversation, the doctor began to explain many things to me, Uncle Akihiro, who came running over to the hospital, soon joined in as well. That day, Mom and Dad had been in a traffic accident right before my eyes. Just as I ran out toward them, a truck with a drunk driver behind the wheel barreled through the intersection, ignoring a red light. He hit head on by the massive vehicle, which had been traveling at 60 kilometers an hour or more. My dad died instantly from massive blunt force trauma. Mom had miraculously survived, but at the moment she was still unconscious, fighting for her life in critical condition. At least she's still alive, if only barely. When I learned all this, I didn't cry and grieve, and I didn't explode with anger against the man who'd caused the accident. The words the doctor used were really hard to understand, so a lot of the conversation went over my head. That probably had something to do with it. But more than anything else, nothing about this situation felt remotely real to me. That night, finally alone in the darkened hospital room, I flexed my legs and arms thoughtfully. No matter how many times I tested it, my body didn't feel injured. I could move just as freely and easily as before. And maybe Dad was dead. Maybe Mom was lying unconscious somewhere in this hospital, but I hadn't seen either of them yet. So maybe everyone telling me about this accident was just lying. Maybe if I were to get up out of bed and head straight home, my parents would be waiting for me there. My thoughts persistently returned to these comforting, paper-thin theories. And more importantly, in the depths of my mind, a clear memory remained. The instant my thoughts brushed against that fragment of the past, I could hear my heart throb violently in my chest. This time, the shrill buzzing that accompanied the similar incident 3 days earlier was conspicuously absent. In exchange, the most severe headache of my life fell upon me with all the suddenness and force of an avalanche. The sharp burst of pain, as if my body was warning me not to touch an open wound, robbed me of the will to think. Then I'll just stop trying. I'm sick of fainting. As soon as I emptied my mind, the headache vanished with astonishing speed. My breaths came easier, and I could feel my heartbeat gradually returning to its normal rhythm. There's something wrong with my body after all. Nothing like this ever happened to me before that day. As my mind began to reach a conclusion I didn't want to accept, I involuntarily recalled the agony I had just endured. If I remember what happened, the pain will come back. The ensuing wave of terror wiped all else from my mind. Pulling the blankets over my head in search of refuge, I waited for the morning to come. Did that accident they keep talking about really happen? Several days later, that disbelief still lingering in my mind, I was taken to visit my mom in the intensive care unit for the first time. After carefully disinfecting my hands with alcohol, the nurses dressed me up in a hospital gown just like theirs, then finally ushered me into the room. And just as they told me, my mother was inside. But the person lying on the bed in front of me wasn't the mom I knew. There was a huge oxygen mask covering her mouth, bandages were wrapped around her head, numerous tubes were sticking out of her body, connecting her to all sorts of machines. The sight reminded me nothing so much as the Frankenstein monsters I'd seen in the movie. But this was reality. That day, the accident happened exactly as they told me, and now my mom was sleeping in a nest of machines. In the instant I finally perceived that undeniable fact as reality, I was struck by a powerful wave of nausea. The hospital room grew dark before me, and in that darkness, a fuzzy image flickered before my eyes, disappearing for the briefest of moments, only to re-emerge. Like some pale, indistinct horror, bobbing up and down just beneath the surface of a muddy lake. Unable to endure the sickness swelling up from the core of my body, I vomited up the contents of my stomach on the spot and was hastily carried out of the room by the nurse who'd accompanied me. After that, I tried to return to the ICU numerous times, but the outcome was always the same. The moment I saw my mother in the hospital bed, I experienced severe nausea and was quickly removed from the room. The doctor took these events very seriously and eventually forbid me from visiting Mom for the time being. That night, I laid awake in bed until well after the lights had been turned out, unable to fall asleep. I hadn't suffered any real injuries, so sitting around all day often left me with too much physical energy. Sometimes I would go an entire day without feeling hungry or lie awake in bed for hours. And today the things I'd heard during the daytime were also weighing heavily on my mind. I lay in my bed, staring up at the now familiar tiles on the ceiling, and thought about my parents.
もうこの世界にお父さんはいない。それにお母さんだって。
She might never open her eyes again. Sometimes I'd overhear my uncle talking about nurses in lowered tones. Apparently Mom was sick with something called a persistent vegetative state. From what I could figure out, that meant the possibility she'd wake up again was really, really low. Mom's going to be asleep forever and ever. In other words, I'll never be able to talk to her again. A bitter frustration welled up inside me at the thought.
やだ。そんなの嫌だよ。
But no matter how hard I tried to deny the reality, nothing would change. Even if my parents' job would no longer keep us apart, the blissful days I'd wished for would never return. The more I understood the situation, the heavier my despair grew. Tears spilled relentlessly from my eyes. My mind was full with a miserable new question. Why? Why had it turned out like this?
あの日は私の誕生日だったのに、本当ならゆうくんと一日中遊んで、去年よりもずっと楽しい日になるはずだったのに。
But in reality, I hadn't been able to see him. Because of that sudden accident, Dad was dead, and Mom was sleeping forever. Everything. Everything I loved had been taken away from me in one horrible instant.
どうしてこんなことになったの？私。どうして